In the packed courtroom, Prosecutor Vivian Shaw sneered, her voice dripping with contempt as it echoed off the walls. "Is this a joke, Your Honor? Are we truly going to allow a 19-year-old boy in a thrift store suit to play at being a lawyer? This isn't some mock trial at a community college. This is the real world, and his mother is facing prison time." Elias Crow stood frozen at the defense table, the weight of the jury's stares pressing down on him like a physical force. They had laughed. The judge had sighed. They all believed it was over before it had even begun. But they had no idea that this determined young man was about to challenge the very foundations of the legal system. The air in courtroom 302 of the Cook County Circuit Court hung heavy, thick with the scent of polished wood, aged paper, and decades of quiet desperation. For 19-year-old Elias Crow, it felt as though the walls themselves were closing in around him. He sat at the defense table, his slender frame nearly swallowed by a borrowed suit that hung loosely on his shoulders, 2 sizes too large. His hands gripped the edges of a worn legal pad. Beside him sat his mother, Lydia Crow. Her hands, roughened by years of double shifts at the city hospital's laundry, trembled as they clutched a crumpled tissue. Lydia was facing 20 years in a federal penitentiary. The charges were severe: a complex conspiracy to commit wire fraud, and the embezzlement of over $200,000 from a local community development fund. It was as absurd as it was terrifying. Lydia barely knew how to navigate an ATM, let alone mastermind a sophisticated digital scheme. But the prosecution cared little for the truth. They sought conviction, and Lydia made the perfect scapegoat for a corrupt city councilman eager to cover his own tracks. Leading the charge was Prosecutor Vivian Shaw. She was a formidable figure in the local legal scene, known for her razor-sharp rhetoric and an astonishing conviction rate of 98%, a number she achieved through brilliant argumentation, aggressive tactics, and, according to whispers in the courthouse corridors, a willingness to push the boundaries of ethics until they nearly broke. She paced the floor like a predator that had already cornered its prey, her heels striking the marble in a sharp, relentless rhythm that seemed to count down the moments until Lydia's world collapsed. Elias was no lawyer. He was a 19-year-old college dropout who had been forced to abandon his scholarship at the University of Chicago, where he had been studying applied mathematics and logic. When his mother was arrested and the state froze their small bank accounts, there was no money left for a proper defense attorney. The public defender assigned to the case, buried under a caseload of 200 clients, had urged Lydia to accept a plea deal that would still send her to prison for 10 years. Elias had refused to accept that fate. Gifted with an extraordinary memory and a mind that could unravel complex systems with remarkable speed, he had spent the preceding months living in the basement of the local public library. He devoured every legal text he could find: the federal rules of civil procedure, state statutes, volumes of case law, and the intricate web of constitutional precedent. He had filed a petition to represent his mother pro se, invoking a rare, little-used provision in the state constitution that permitted a family member to advocate on behalf of a defendant when no adequate counsel could be obtained. Judge Harlan Beck, a weary man nearing retirement, peered down from the bench. He adjusted his glasses, his gaze moving from the poised prosecutor to the frightened mother and her intense young son. "Mr. Crow," the judge began, his tone laced with patronizing sympathy, "I have reviewed your petition. While I admire your devotion to your mother, the law is not a playground for amateurs. You are facing an incredibly complex web of financial statutes. The prosecution has presented a devastating paper trail. Are you absolutely certain you wish to proceed this way? If you fail, your mother will face the maximum penalty." Elias swallowed hard. The courtroom had fallen into a heavy silence. He could feel the eyes of the reporters in the back, the bailiff's sneer, and the unwavering disdain radiating from Vivian Shaw. He turned to his mother. She gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. "I am certain, Your Honor," Elias said, his voice wavering for a moment before he steadied it. "The truth is not a playground either, sir. And the truth is that my mother is innocent. Vivian Shaw let out a short, sharp laugh. Your Honor, please. We are wasting the court's time. The defendant signed the disbursement forms. We have the IP addresses. We have the financial logs. This boy is going to stand up here and quote Wikipedia while his mother tries to evade justice. The battle lines were drawn. The vast, indifferent system was prepared to crush them both. But behind his nervous exterior, Elias's brilliant mind was already at work, cross-referencing every word the prosecutor uttered against the thousands of pages of legal code he had committed to memory. The gavel fell, and the trial began in earnest. The early days of the trial unfolded as a masterclass in humiliation. Prosecutor Vivian Shaw was not content merely to win. She seemed determined to destroy Elias Crow, to make an example of him and demonstrate that the legal system was a closed circle that did not welcome outsiders. Whenever Elias attempted to cross-examine the prosecution's forensic accountant, Shaw objected to nearly every question. Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is leading the witness. Objection. Hearsay. Objection. Mr. Crow is misapplying the rules of evidence and citing a statute repealed years ago. Judge Beck sustained nearly all of them. Mr. Crow, he warned, rubbing his temples. You cannot simply read from a textbook and expect it to apply here. The law requires nuance and interpretation, not mere recitation. The jury watched with a mixture of pity and embarrassment. Elias stumbled repeatedly, his carefully prepared questions derailed by Shaw's relentless procedural objections. She wielded the rules not to uncover truth, but to smother it. The turning point came when Shaw introduced the prosecution's key evidence, Exhibit 42, a series of digital authorization logs supposedly showing Lydia Crow's secure employee ID initiating the fraudulent wire transfers. Elias rose, his hands trembling slightly as he held a stack of printed server logs he had subpoenaed. Your Honor, he began, his voice unsteady at first, but growing stronger. I would like to introduce a motion to suppress Exhibit 42. I have analyzed the metadata from the city's servers. The timestamps on these authorizations do not align with my mother's shift schedule. Furthermore, the IP address objection, Shaw interrupted, slamming her hand on the table. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. Is the defense attempting to qualify this teenager as a cybersecurity expert? He dropped out of college, Your Honor. He holds no degrees, no certifications, and has no standing to interpret digital forensics in a court of law. This is a desperate attempt to confuse the jury with technical jargon he probably found online. Laughter rippled through the gallery. Even some jurors smiled. Lydia Crow buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking silently. Elias's face burned with humiliation. He knew he was right. The mathematics of the timestamps were clear. The transfers had originated from a secondary terminal on the 4th floor of the municipal building, a floor Lydia had no access to. But without being recognized as an expert, he could not get the evidence admitted. Judge Beck banged his gavel. Order. Miss Shaw, maintain professional commentary. However, Mr. Crow, the prosecution is correct. You are not a recognized expert. I cannot permit you to testify regarding the validity of the metadata. The motion to suppress is denied. But Your Honor, Elias pleaded, gripping the podium, if you would just look at the raw data denied. Mr. Crow, Judge Beck snapped. One more outburst, and I will hold you in contempt. I warned you from the beginning that this was a mistake. You were sinking your mother's case. As Shaw returned to her table, a triumphant smirk on her lips, she paused beside Elias and leaned in, her voice a venomous whisper meant only for him. You should have taken the plea deal, kid. Tomorrow, I rest my case, and by Friday, your mother will be in a holding cell. Go home. You're out of your league. Elias stood alone in the center of the room, surrounded by the crushing weight of impending defeat. The system was rigged. No matter how intelligent he was or how hard he worked, the rules seemed designed to protect those in power. As court adjourned, Elias packed his battered briefcase. He did not cry or scream. Instead, a cold, unyielding resolve settled in his chest. Vivian Shaw thought she had beaten him with the rules, but she had forgotten one crucial detail. Elias did not merely read the rules, he understood the deeper architecture beneath them. And that night, He intended to locate the flaw that would bring her entire case crashing down in the quiet hours before dawn. With the trial set to resume in just a few hours, Elias sat cross-legged on the floor of the library basement. He was surrounded by a fortress of legal encyclopedias, printed case files, and thousands of pages of discovery documents. His eyes were bloodshot, his mind fueled by black coffee and raw adrenaline. He had to change his approach. Fighting Vivian Shaw on procedural grounds was like trying to outswim a shark in its own waters. To defeat her, he would have to reach into the foundational bedrock of constitutional law. He reviewed every document again, every transcript, every piece of evidence. He knew the digital logs were fabricated, but he could not prove it without an expert witness. So he would have to prove that the prosecution itself was legally invalid. His breakthrough came in those still hours. While examining the city's civil forfeiture statutes, the very laws Shaw had used to seize Lydia's home and accounts even before verdict, he cross-referenced them with the landmark Supreme Court decision in Timms, Vieck, Indiana. That ruling had established that the Eighth Amendment's protection against excessive fines applies to the states through the 14th Amendment. Shaw had already frozen Lydia's bank accounts and seized their modest family home, claiming the assets were proceeds of crime. But Elias dug deeper into the specific municipal ordinance she had invoked, Ordinance 409. There, he found the fatal flaw. In her rush to strip Lydia of her defenses, Shaw had filed the asset forfeiture under a code that required a mandatory 48-hour review by a federal magistrate because federal grant funds were involved. She had bypassed that requirement, using a local judge, reportedly a friend, to rubber stamp the seizure instead. Worse still, when Elias turned to the Brady disclosure file, the prosecution's legal obligation to turn over any exculpatory evidence, he discovered something devastating. Buried deep within thousands of pages of seemingly irrelevant emails was a message from the city's lead ID technician to Vivian Shaw herself. Sent weeks before the trial, the email stated that an audit of the fourth floor terminal had revealed a remote access Trojan installed on the machine. The IP address linked to the fraudulent transfers had actually been routed from an offshore server through the municipal network. Lydia Crow's credentials had been spoofed. A diagnostic report was attached. Elias stopped breathing. His heart hammered against his ribs. Vivian Shaw had known. She had known all along that Lydia was innocent. She had received undeniable proof of a cyber attack and had buried the report. She had deliberately withheld exculpatory evidence to secure a conviction and protect the city councilman. It was a flagrant Brady violation, prosecutorial misconduct of the gravest kind. But simply presenting the email in court would not be enough. Shaw would object, claim it was inadmissible or a draft. Elias needed to trap her, to lock her into a lie on the record in front of the judge and jury before delivering the decisive blow. For the remaining hours, he drafted a precise legal trap. He was not only going to save his mother, he was going to use the very laws Shaw had weaponized to dismantle her career and set a precedent that would echo through the state. As dawn broke, Elias Crow stood up. He changed his shirt, washed his face in the library bathroom, and looked at his reflection. The frightened, stuttering boy from the early days of the trial was gone. In his eyes burned the cold, calculating precision of a master strategist who had already mapped out the final moves. Courtroom 302 was packed. Word had spread through the courthouse about the young man being systematically dismantled by the legendary Vivian Shaw. Law students, reporters, and courthouse staff filled the gallery, eager to witness the final act. Lydia Crow sat at the defense table, pale and defeated. She reached out and squeezed her son's hand. "It's okay, sweetheart," she whispered. "You did your best. I'm so proud of you." Elias squeezed back, his grip steady. "I'm not finished, Emma. Just watch." Judge Beck took the bench and brought down his gavel. "Court is in session. The prosecution has rested. Mr. Crow, does the defense have any final witnesses or evidence to present before we proceed to closing arguments?" "I remind you, I will not tolerate further procedural deviations." Elias rose. He brought no notes, no legal pads. He stood perfectly straight, his voice carrying a new depth and authority that silenced the murmurs in the gallery. "Your Honor," he began, his articulation clear and commanding. "The defense calls its final witness." Vivian Shaw rolled her eyes. "Oh, for heaven's sake, who is it this time?" "The neighborhood mail carrier." Elias turned his head slowly and met the prosecutor's gaze. "The defense calls lead prosecutor Vivian Shaw to the stand." A collective gasp swept through the courtroom. The bailiff dropped his pen. Judge Beck leaned forward, eyes wide. "Mr. Crow, you cannot call the prosecuting attorney as a witness. It is highly irregular and nearly prohibited under the rules of professional conduct. Objection!" Shaw shouted, her face flushing with anger. "This is an outrage. It is a stunt. I demand he be held in contempt immediately." "Your Honor," Elias countered smoothly, producing a single sheet of paper from his pocket. "I am invoking Illinois compiled statute section 115-14, which permits the calling of opposing counsel when that attorney possesses crucial, non-privileged information unobtainable by any other means and central to a claim of prosecutorial misconduct." Shaw laughed, though the sound was strained. "Misconduct? Are you out of your mind, kid? I am prepared to make an offer of proof." "Your Honor," Elias continued, "if Miss Shaw refuses to take the stand, I will move for an immediate mistrial with prejudice on the grounds of a severe and intentional Brady violation involving suppressed exculpatory evidence." The words Brady violation landed like a thunderclap. It was the most serious accusation that could be leveled against a prosecutor. The deliberate hiding of evidence that could prove innocence. Judge Beck studied Elias, truly seeing him for the first time. The young man was no longer floundering. He was in complete control. The judge turned to Shaw, whose confident smirk had faltered. "Miss Shaw," Judge Beck said slowly, "are you aware of any exculpatory evidence that has not been turned over to the defense?" "Absolutely not, Your Honor," Shaw replied smoothly, regaining her composure. "This boy is fishing. He has no evidence. He is trying to turn this courtroom into a circus." Elias seized the moment. "Let the record show that Prosecutor Shaw has formally stated under oath to this court that she is aware of no exculpatory evidence." He took 3 measured steps toward the center of the room. "Your Honor, I ask the court to turn its attention to Defense Exhibit 99. Elias handed a folder to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge, then gave a copy to a suddenly pale Vivian Shaw. "Exhibit 99 is a verified, time-stamped communication from the city's lead IT technician, Richard Vance, sent directly to Miss Shaw's official government email address weeks before the trial. Inside this email is a diagnostic report proving that the IP address used to commit the fraud was spoofed from an external network using a remote access Trojan. The email explicitly states that Lydia Crow's credentials were stolen." The courtroom erupted. Reporters scrambled for their phones. Lydia Crow gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "That is inadmissible," Shaw shrieked, her voice rising in panic. "He hacked my emails. That is a federal crime." "No, I did not," Elias replied calmly, his voice cutting through the chaos. "I subpoenaed the IT department's communication logs regarding server maintenance. It was buried in the thousands of pages of discovery you provided, hoping I would not read it all. You hid the needle in the haystack, Miss Shaw, but you forgot that I am very, very good at finding needles." Judge Beck read the email, his face darkening to a deep shade of red. He looked up at Shaw, fury in his eyes. "Miss Shaw, is this document authentic?" Shaw was breathing rapidly now, the walls closing in. "Your Honor, it was. It was an inconclusive report. It was a draft. We did not believe the ID technician's methodology was sound." "You do not believe it?" Judge Beck roared, the loudest sound anyone had heard from him. "It is not your job to decide whether exculpatory evidence is sound. It is your job to turn it over to the defense. This is a textbook Brady violation. You have committed a severe ethical breach." "But I am not finished." "Your Honor," Elias interrupted, his voice dropping to a steely register. "Because this is not only about the Brady violation. This is about Ordinance 409. He walked to the podium. Under the guise of this fraudulent prosecution, Miss Shaw utilized Municipal Ordinance for 109 to seize my mother's bank accounts and our family home. However, as the Supreme Court ruled in Timms v. Indiana, the protection against excessive fines applies to state and local civil forfeitures. The seizure of a family home for a crime she knew my mother did not commit is not merely excessive. It constitutes a deprivation of civil rights under color of law, in violation of 18 U.S.S.D. Section 242. Elias looked directly at the jury, then the gallery, then the judge. Furthermore, Your Honor, Ordinance for 109 requires a mandatory federal magistrate review within 48 hours. Miss Shaw bypassed this by using a local judge. Because the underlying warrant was obtained through the deliberate omission of exculpatory evidence, the seizure was unconstitutional. I am formally requesting not only a dismissal of all charges against Lydia Crow, but an immediate judicial order declaring Municipal Ordinance for 109 unconstitutional as applied, along with an injunction releasing all seized assets back to my mother. The courtroom fell into absolute, breathless shock. In a matter of minutes, this 19-year-old had not only exonerated his mother, but had exposed serious prosecutorial corruption, cited Supreme Court precedent with precision, and was now seeking to strike down a city ordinance that had long burdened low-income neighborhoods. Vivian Shaw gripped the edge of her table, her knuckles white. You cannot do this," she whispered, her career unraveling before her eyes. "The law," Elias said, echoing her earlier words, "is not a playground. Miss Shaw, you treated justice like a game you could rook. But you have just been checkmated." Judge Beck sat back heavily in his chair. He removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. The silence stretched for a full minute. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet yet carried the full weight of authority. "In my 30 years on the bench," Judge Beck began, looking at Elias with profound respect, "I have never seen a more egregious abuse of prosecutorial power than what I am witnessing today. And I have never seen a more brilliant deconstruction of a case by any attorney, let alone a 19-year-old representing himself." The judge lifted his gavel. "The charges against Lydia Crow are hereby dismissed with prejudice. They may never be brought again. Furthermore, the court grants the defense's motion. I am issuing an immediate injunction releasing all of Mrs. Crow's assets. And let the record reflect that this court finds the application of Municipal Ordinance for 109 in this matter to be wholly unconstitutional, establishing an immediate precedent that invalidates the city's current civil forfeiture protocols." He turned his fierce gaze to Vivian Shaw. "As for you, Miss Shaw, you are stripped of your standing in this courtroom. I am referring you immediately to the State Bar for disbarment proceedings, and I will be forwarding this transcript to the Department of Justice to investigate you for criminal civil rights violations under color of law." Judge Beck raised the gavel high. "Case dismissed." The sound of the gavel striking wood was the sweetest Elias had ever heard. Instantly, the courtroom exploded into chaos. Lydia Crow burst into heaving sobs, pulling her son into a fierce embrace and burying her face against his cheap suit. "You did it," she cried. "My baby, you saved us." Elias wrapped his arms around her, the cold strategist melting away to reveal a son simply relieved that his mother was safe. "We're going home, M.O.M. We're going home." Across the aisle, the scene was starkly different. Vivian Shaw stood paralyzed. The predator had become the prey. Two court bailiffs, men who once took her orders, approached her slowly. "Ma'am," one said, his voice stripped of respect, "we are going to need you to step back from the table. The judge has ordered us to escort you to the holding area pending the arrival of federal investigators." Shaw looked at Elias. Her eyes were hollow, all arrogance gone. She had spent her career destroying lives for political advantage, wielding the law as a weapon. In the end, it was the law, wielded by the boy she had mocked, that destroyed her. Karma had not merely knocked. It had torn the door from its hinges. She was led away in handcuffs. A final humiliating exit from the courtroom she once ruled. When Elias and Lydia walked out of the heavy double doors of the courthouse, they were blinded by camera flashes. Reporters who had come expecting a slaughter now scrambled for interviews with the prodigy who had broken the system. Elias. Elias. How did you find the email? Mr. Crow, what are your plans now? Will you sue the city? Are you going to law school? Elias paused on the courthouse steps. He looked out at the Chicago skyline, where grey clouds were finally parting to let a ray of sunlight touch the pavement. He looked at his mother, who was smiling for the first time in what felt like forever. I'm not interested in fame, Elias told the microphones, his voice calm and steady. I just wanted to save my mother from a system that had forgotten what justice means. The law is meant to be a shield for the vulnerable, not a sword for the corrupt. And if the people in power forget that, he said, looking directly into the camera, then someone has to remind them in the aftermath. The consequences were devastating for the corrupt establishment. The Department of Justice investigation into Vivian Shaw uncovered a web of corruption that led straight to the city councilman who had orchestrated the original fraud. Facing her own prison time, Shaw turned state's witness. The councilman was indicted. Municipal Ordinance for 109 was completely rewritten, citing the new precedent established in Kroviak. City of Chicago, a ruling that would protect countless families from having their homes seized without due process. As for Elias, his story spread rapidly. The dean of Harvard Law School personally contacted him, offering a full scholarship and waiving the undergraduate degree requirement based on his extraordinary courtroom performance. Elias accepted. He had entered that courtroom as a boy in a borrowed suit, mocked and dismissed. He walked out as a legal force to be reckoned with. The court had tried to break him, but instead it had forged a champion of justice, and the legal world would never be the same. This is a powerful story of brilliance, courage, and justice served. Elias Crow proved that true intelligence combined with fierce love can shatter even the most entrenched systems of corruption. Prosecutor Vivian Shaw believed herself untouchable, yet karma has an undefeated record. The way Elias used the very laws designed to oppress his mother to dismantle Shaw's career is nothing short of extraordinary. It is a reminder that the truth will always surface and that no one stands above the law when someone is brave enough to fight back. If this story of ultimate resilience and hard-won justice moved you, please show your support by liking this video. Share it with someone who appreciates a satisfying underdog tale. And subscribe while turning on notifications so you never miss our dramatic stories of justice and redemption. What would you have done in Elias's position? Let me know in the comments below. See you in the next story.